Pause. Is this the type of performance you would expect from a church on Easter Sunday? Well, it was. This performance was done to over 5,000 people and was met with thunderous applause from the congregation. Now, for any Christians out there, do you think this is the new standard churches must exhibit for people to get closer to God? Whether you agree or not is completely up to you. Everyone is on their own journey, discovering their faith. But something about this just doesn't sit right in my spirit. And I know I'm not the only person out there feeling this way. This is Mike Todd and his wife Natalie Todd, head pastors at Transformation Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a mega church visited weekly by 5,000 people in person and over 20,000 live online. Hitting his first million views with the series Relationship Goals, his fame only went up from there. Following up with Crazy Faith and other sermons that would gain millions of views on multiple different platforms, obtaining an Instagram following of 2.1 million, rubbing shoulders with famous pastors and celebrities. What went wrong? Now, I know there's plenty of videos out there talking about how the ransom play was blasphemous and downright demonic, and we'll get into all those allegations shortly. However, I believe that the biggest mistake that was made in that show started at the very beginning.
The person who feels lonely and isolated and like God doesn't care, I want them to see how amazing Jesus actually is and what God actually did for all of us. So I said, we're going to go to the edge on this. And they said, Pastor, how far on the edge are we going to go? I said, we're going to do everything short of sin. Oh, y'all, I felt the religious people, their booties got tight right there.
Now, this was the one chance he had to explain to the congregation and the viewers at home exactly what they were going to be watching. Essentially, all he had to do was lay down the foundations so that when the inevitable backlash were to arrive, he would have a leg to stand on. To say he butchered this would be a complete understatement. He continues throughout his speech to not once acknowledge the genuine concerns Christians all over the world would have about this play. Instead, starts deflecting blame on the booty-tight religious people. Because there's no way he could ever be wrong, right? I mean, he's the one with the relationship with God, right? And all those other religious people with the tight booties are just pride-hungry haters who don't know God and just wants to see him go down. He calls it the religious people. I call it the people with discernment.
The enemy has been trying to convince me for 2.5 weeks to vacate my spot and believe the lies of people who don't know me.
He deflects liability by discrediting anyone that will speak out against the teachings and methods presented to the world on Easter Sunday. I read a comment that said, "Those who lack accountability will always see correction as hate and criticism." And I agree.
Because now we have adopted what I like to call the affective principle of worship. And the affective principle of worship goes like this. If somebody likes it and it makes them feel close to God, it's good. That's all that's required. If people are blessed by it, if it's meaningful to them, and if it facilitates an encounter, if it facilitates an experience with God, then it is acceptable. And anyone who says otherwise is judgmental and legalistic and mean.
Now, he does end up saying that he's doing this to reach non-believers and lost sinners in this world. And Jesus does say, "Go into all nations and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation." But I think the main question, what I want to ask everyone watching, do you think this is the right way to do it? Let me know what you think in the comments below.
I don't know anything demonic that got 629 people saved. I don't know.
I've also been hearing a lot of people say, who cares how the story is told? 600 people gave their lives to Christ and got saved. I mean, that's all that matters, right? What else can you ask for? Well, let me tell you a quick story. There was a farmer who went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell along rocky places, where they didn't have much soil. It sprung up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seeds fell along thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still, other seeds fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 100, 60, 30 times what was sown. Those who have ears, let him hear.
Because we have dumbed down the gospel, because we're not preaching the true gospel, and we are using carnal means to attract people. If you use carnal means to attract men, you're going to attract carnal men. And you're going to have to keep using greater carnal means to keep them in the church. So what has happened is this. We have these large churches filled with many unconverted carnal people. But in those churches, we also have this small group of people that honestly want Christ. And they honestly want His Word, and they honestly want to be transformed. They don't need anything else. All they need is true worship of the true God and Scripture being preached to them and lived out before them. That's what they want.
When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their hearts. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word at once and receives it with joy. But since they have no roots, they only last a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the world, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Jesus here places a lot of emphasis on the quality of one's spiritual health, not the quantity. Notice that the number of crops that grew from the rocky ground or along the path weren't mentioned, because the number is irrelevant, because those crops never grew to be fruitful. It's really hard to undo false misconceptions and understanding once it's already been rooted there. Now, one of the main things that made me question the foundation on which this play was built on was the fact that this play about Jesus barely had Jesus in it. Like, most of the play was set in hell, and the dragon had more dialogue than anybody else, including the Son and the Father. Like, what? How do you even write a story about Jesus but don't make Jesus the main character? But to be fair, I guess they had more important scenes to focus on. The story was like this Batman versus Joker type narrative, almost making it look like the devil is on the same playing field as Jesus, which he's not. Then all of a sudden this dragon character gets in a full sword fight with Jesus and then just stabs him and then puts him on the cross. By the way, the cross is in hell. Then they sing a little baby song and whatever, then bam, Jesus just steps out like the Hulk, smashes everything he sees, saves the world, and they play some gospel music, and that's it. Happy Easter, everybody. Now, personally, I think as a story on the gospel, it kind of fell short. However, as a play, it kind of sucked. But as entertainment, it wasn't bad. In fact, it was really good. I mean, the stage was pretty cool. I like the set design. It kind of reminds me of something. Oh yes, and the choreography. The choreography was on point. That also reminded me of something. Gosh, why can't I put my finger on it? Is this the message we want to be placing in the hearts of many new and growing believers? Is it worth planting 600 seeds on this soil? Yeah, some of them will still be saved and produce good fruit, but it won't be because of this play. It's gonna be in spite of it. God will always rule quality over quantity. Matthew 22 verse 14 says it best. For many are called, but few are chosen. I'll be honest and say I do listen to quite a few secular artists, more than I probably should. So this form of music isn't foreign to me because I can enjoy it. But It should never be misconstrued as something that is of God or something that has a place in the house of God. No matter how much you edit the lyrics, water down the sexual aspects of these performances, people come to church for God, for His love, for His word, for His wisdom, for His forgiveness, for His grace, and for His peace. Beyonce is quite literally the last person I want to hear. Wait a minute, are you saying that we as Christians should never talk about real life struggles like drugs, sex, porn, and greed in the church? There's stories on a wife begging God to make her husband love her, someone stealing their brother's inheritance, an attempted gang, an actual that was avenged by a mass murder of the entire village the man lived in, 2 daughters getting their dad drunk to make sure they get pregnant because, and I quote, there were no more men left alive. And that's all in Genesis alone. The difference between this and this is one is bringing sin into the light and the other is glamorizing it. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, and put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their sight. It's one thing to water down the gospel, but to water down sin and only play it on the edge is a good way to fall right off the cliff. Because it doesn't look or feel that bad, especially if we sprinkle some Jesus in there. You know, it's not like they sung the full diva song or did Die Young word for word. Those girls weren't even twerking like that bad. Plus, it was done to prove a point, right? But the truth is, that's one of the devil's greatest and oldest tricks.
Because I had to go back to my example. I said, I'm not trying to prove nothing to nobody. God, you the one gave me ransom. I didn't want ransom. You did that.
Sin never starts with the action, but with the heart. And if your heart is telling you to get on the edge of sin, maybe take a minute to pray and find out who's really speaking to you in that moment. Does this sound like something God would ask me to do? See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human traditions and elemental spiritual forces of this world, rather than on Christ. He has chosen you out of the world because we do not belong in the world, and He has called us to not be conformed to this world, but transformed by the renewal of our mind and by testing what we discern is the will of God. The world should be trying its best to look like the church, not the church trying to look like the world. Look, I've barely scraped the surface of this play. There's a lot more we can get into. I mean, I haven't even talked about the big red boots worn on stage by the brand Mischief that also made the Satan shoe, or the fact that the City Girls got a shout out in the house of the Lord.
And if you act up, you can get snatched up, period.
I also want to make it clear, I don't want creativity and artistic expressions of the Bible to stop. I mean, there's movies like God's Not Dead, Prince of Egypt, The Chosen, Passion of Christ, Narnia, Jesus Christ Superstar, Joseph and His Technicolor Dreamcoat, and one of the most goated shows of all time, VeggieTales. The reason why these films and shows mentioned before haven't received 1/10 of the backlash that Ransom is receiving right now is because it was never played in church, especially on Easter Sunday. You don't have to agree with all those shows. We don't have to look into the theology of all these programs because it was never presented to us as the gospel. It was simply and purely entertainment.
The gospel is not just a doctrine added on to other doctrines. It's not just one among many. It is the greatest manifestation of the attributes, the person of God that has ever been given or will ever be given. If you right now were standing in the place of Isaiah in Isaiah 6, if you were beholding the very face of God upon the throne, you could not understand Him well unless you also understand the gospel, because it is there He is revealed.
I do think that there were a lot of things done in this play That was not a good representation of who God is or how He wants us to spread His message. But I urge everyone watching this video to please continue to read the Bible for yourselves and continue to pray and ask God for discernment and wisdom. And it's not just Mike Todd's fault. I mean, all the pastors, deacons, board leaders, musicians, directors, cast and crew, and even more people would have had to seen this and approved. Like, I don't know, it's just crazy to me. Like, you're telling me not one person looked at this play and said, hey guys, maybe 2 Beyonce songs is enough for the play. Mega or micro, any church that plays more Beyonce or any other secular music more than the gospel on Easter should have alarm bells ringing in my head and my heart. I hope people from this church can see that I am coming from a place of love, not only for them, but for everybody else watching. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to admit some things were taken too far. At the end of the day, I would like to think they had really good intentions, but just poor execution. I can't sit here and demonize him or the church because I don't know their hearts or intentions. That part is for God to judge. I can only question what's being presented to me as truth when deep down, I know it's not.